So now we're going to talk about switch statements. They're a little bit, so a good way that I like to think about switch statements is that it's basically a more efficient way to doing a bunch of if and else if statements. Because if you think about it, that's essentially what a switch statement does, is a bunch of if and else ifs. So the one key difference is that we have this keyword break, and I'll tell you what basically that is used for. So basically it will always follow this same similar syntax, is that we'll have a switch, like the keyword switch, then we have like a variable. So what happens is that it takes this variable and compares it to all these cases, basically like a bunch of if and else ifs. And so the reason why we need to have these break statements is because there's something called fall through, that means that if I don't have this break statement here, what it will do is it will keep, like, so let's say input is A in this case. So input, sorry, my handwriting is really bad. So like input equals A, like the string A, because that's what it's comparing to. If that's true and I don't have this break here, it will set number to 0, but then what it'll keep doing is it'll just keep going down and running every line of code until it hits a break statement. So then it will hit this one here as well. And then it sees a break, so then it will stop. So instead of, like, if we wanted number to be 0, if we saw an A, well, if we didn't have a break statement here, it would go into the B case as well, and that's what's called fall through. And so that's why you want to have the break, because that tells it, okay, stop running the lines of code and basically go down to here. So if we don't have that break there, like if we never had a break like this, if all of them didn't have breaks, what it'll do is like set number to 0, then set number to 1, then set number to 3, and then it'll hit the default and set number to -1. And that's not what we want to do, because that's kind of, redundant. That's basically saying, we want the goal of the switch statement is that basically compare it against all these cases, and depending on the case, do a specific thing. But if you don't have the breaks, it will always just do this one, which is not what we want to do. So default, you can think of it as like the else statement to all of these. So this is like an if, else if, and then default's like the else. So if none of these are true, it'll go into the default. So we don't need to have a default, similar to the reason why, like with ifs, we don't need an else. It's just, we don't need the default, but sometimes it's still nice to have it there. So if it's like if it's not any of these ones, we can do a specific thing, but you don't need the default there. So yep, the default case is ran anytime that none of these cases are true. But similar to like if statement, it will run this one, like if the case is A, so if input is A, it'll set number to 0, and then we need to make sure to have these breaks there. But let's say we want a situation where if the number is A or B, we want it to do the same thing. So let's say like if input is A or B, we want to set the number to 1. What we can do is we can actually just do something like we can say like case A, kind of like this, like what we have, and then don't put anything in it, just follow it up directly with case B. So what this will do is if case A is true, and let's say we had like code for case B, and we had a break, keep in mind, have the break. So what will happen is if case A is true, what it will do is it will, since there's no code for A, it will do the code whatever one's right underneath it. So it will run the code for case B. So that means like, this basically means if case A or case B run this code. Does that make sense? In what cases would it be smart to switch instead of an if-else statement? They essentially do the same thing. A lot of times it's easier and less code to use a switch statement. A menu is good to use anytime, like you kind of want to prevent having like a bunch of else ifs, like if, else if, else if, else if, else if, else. If you're gonna do that, it looks kind of sloppy and it like takes up a lot of lines of code because you have like all the brackets and whatnot. So if you have a bunch of if and else ifs, then it's better to use a switch. But if you have just like an if, one else if, and then an else, it's probably better just to go the if and else if else route. So yeah, the only time really switch statement is a bit better is if you're going to have a bunch of if and else ifs. Then switch statement just is more compact. Because like instead of, because this is what this is like 14 lines of code compared to if and else ifs, which might be like 30, because you have so many like curly brackets and everything like that.